The year is 1953. The dust of World War II had settled, but the tank debates had not. American engineers were busy moving on to bigger, heavier, more complicated machines. They were quick to dismiss the old workhorse, the M4 Sherman, calling it outdated, even a failure. But one brave soldier, a woman named Eleanor Vance, knew the truth about its remarkable resilience and simple genius. And she knew that somewhere, deep in a suppressed file, even her former enemies had agreed with her. This is the story of how she fought the system, risked everything, and proved that true superiority isn't always about the biggest gun. It's about the toughest heart. Setting the scene, Fort Darrow, Texas, 1953. Hot, dusty. The smell of burnt oil hangs in the air. Sergeant Major Eleanor Vance, Ellie, to the few friends she had, didn't look like the other tank mechanics at Fort Darrow. While the men wore grease-stained fatigues and kept their hair cropped close, Ellie kept her own dark hair pulled back in a severe braid. Her uniform meticulously clean despite the grit that seemed to fall from the Texas sky every minute. She was 32 years old, built with the kind of solid strength that came from years of wrestling steel and stubborn officers. Fort Darrow was an old, sprawling testing ground, a place where tanks went to live hard and die harder. Ellie was assigned to the dwindling M4 Sherman fleet, specifically the M4A3E8, the Easy 8, the last and best version of the tank that had won the war. Her job was to run diagnostic tests, log maintenance hours, and write reports proving its value against the rising stars, the massive, complicated, and failure-prone prototypes the generals were now obsessed with. This put her directly in the crosshairs of Colonel Harold Hastings. Hastings was a man of tradition and sharp angles. He liked things big, heavy, and complicated, believing that only raw weight and armor could command respect. He saw Ellie not as the Army's foremost expert on medium tank maintenance, which she was, but as a necessary, annoying afterthought. The weekly technical review meeting was held in a barracks room that smelled of stale coffee and ambition. Ellie sat at the end of the long wooden table, her report, titled M4A3E8, Superior Field Reliability and Crew Hour Efficiency, laid out neatly before her. Colonel Hastings cleared his throat, a dry, dismissive sound. "All right, gentlemen, let's finish up this business with the old relics. Sergeant Major Vance, your final report on the Easy 8. Make it brief. We have to discuss the T-44's new turret mount." Ellie stood, her voice clear and strong, without a hint of nervousness. "Sir, with respect, the Sherman is not a relic. After 600 hours of intensive field testing in Darrow's worst terrain, the M4A3E8 has maintained a 97% operational readiness rate." She tapped the page. "Crucially, the average repair time for a major engine replacement in the field is 6 hours. The T-44 prototype, by contrast, requires 48 hours and a specialized crane unit. The Sherman is the definition of simple, sustainable fighting power." A laugh broke out from the man next to her, Major Thompson, one of the T-44 project engineers. "Simple, Sergeant Major? You mean primitive. We're not fighting the Africa Corps with antique farm equipment, Vance. We need heavy armor, not something a garage mechanic can patch up with a crescent wrench and a prayer." Thompson's joke earned a ripple of chuckles around the table. Ellie met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "Sir, in the middle of a muddy skirmish, simple is the difference between a crew driving home and a crew becoming a statistic. The Sherman's engine is accessible from the top deck. The T-44 requires a full removal of the rear plate and a clean, level surface. The reality of combat is dirt, chaos, and speed. The Sherman excels in that reality. The T-44 fails it." Colonel Hastings slammed his fist softly on the table, silencing the room. His face was a mask of rigid disapproval. "Sergeant Major, that is enough of your emotional analysis. Your job is to log numbers, not lecture my engineers on tactics. The T-44 is the future. Your report is dismissed as biased by sentimentality. I'm having the whole Easy 8 fleet shipped to storage next month. You're excused." Ellie felt the familiar sting, the heat of being marginalized. They didn't hear her. They heard a woman talking about tanks. She saluted sharply, gathering her report. As she turned to leave, she heard Colonel Hastings address the room in a low, contemptuous voice. "Sentimentality. That's what happens when you let a grease monkey near a keyboard. Ellie did not react. She walked out, the dust of the facility settling back onto her shoulders, but the fire of a just fight sparking in her mind. Her report had been dismissed, but the truth, she knew, was still in the numbers, and she would find a way to make them listen, no matter the personal cost. She knew the Sherman was superior in its role, and she sensed that the colonel's deep dislike for it was not merely a matter of military preference. There was something else at play, hidden in the shadows of ambition and high-dollar contracts. Setting the scene, Fort Darrow Motor Pool, late nights. The air is cool but heavy. The dismissal of her report only solidified Ellie's resolve. She wasn't just defending a machine. She was defending a principle. That field reality must dictate design, not desk theories and profit margins. Ellie's world shrank to the dim light of the motor pool and the rhythmic clanging of wrenches. Since the colonel was shipping the Shermans out, she decided she would use their last weeks to run the most punishing, non-sanctioned tests Fort Darrow had ever seen. She wanted data so overwhelming, so physically present, that they couldn't possibly file it away. Her sacrifice was immediate and total. She barely left the base. Her small, tidy room on the edge of the barracks became little more than a place to shower. She ate canned rations and survived on strong coffee. Sleep was a 2-hour luxury at 0200 hours, curled up on a mechanic's cot beside the quiet hulk of her favorite Easy-8, Valkyrie. She ran Valkyrie on high-speed maneuvers through the bone-jarring devil's backbone terrain, measured engine component wear after non-stop 48-hour runs, and timed every single repair process down to the second, documenting everything with meticulous, ink-stained precision in her personal logbooks. During one of these late-night runs, when the moon cast long, ghostly shadows across the desert floor, she noticed a subtle, alarming behavior in the T-44 prototypes parked nearby. They were often sitting idle, with a small specialized crew working on their tracks and suspension, always in the dead of night, away from official oversight. Ellie, a silent shadow, began observing. She noticed that the T-44, designed to be ultra-modern and fast, utilized a unique, complex suspension bogie designed by the manufacturing company, Argos Defense. This bogie was lighter but involved a fragile, high-stress hydraulic linkage. Using a borrowed camera and a pair of long-range binoculars, Ellie started taking photos. She correlated the nighttime repair shifts with official maintenance logs. The truth began to emerge. The T-44's advanced suspension was failing under sustained high-speed operations. The hydraulic linkages were snapping, a catastrophic, unfixable field failure. The design was fatally flawed for actual combat use, and the Argos engineers were scrambling to cover up the frequency of the breakdowns. Ellie was working alone, but she wasn't completely unobserved. Lieutenant Ethan Miller, a young, idealistic engineer fresh out of MIT, was assigned to the T-44 project. He was nervous, smart, and clearly uncomfortable with the backroom deals and the dismissive attitude towards Ellie. He had seen her reliability reports and recognized the simple elegance of her logic. He respected her, but his career hung by a thread. Colonel Hastings had made it clear that loyalty was paramount. One evening, Miller found Ellie examining a discarded T-44 bogie part. He hesitated, then walked up to her. "Sergeant Major Vance," he said softly, looking over his shoulder. "That component, that's from the third prototype. It failed spectacularly on Monday." Ellie nodded, holding the snapped piece of machined steel. "The metallurgy is fine, Lieutenant. The design is the issue. Too much complexity, too many failure points. It's a desk design, not a dirt design." Miller swallowed hard. "Colonel Hastings is very invested in this design, ma'am. He speaks highly of the Argos representatives." "I've noticed," Ellie replied, her eyes sharp. "I'm betting his investment isn't purely military, Lieutenant. But I need more than a hunch. I need proof of the systematic failures they're covering up." Miller stood there, torn between professional caution and moral duty. He knew that helping Ellie could destroy his career. But watching her dedication, her tireless, solitary fight for the truth, gave him a deep, uneasy sense of shame. "There are internal failure reports," Miller whispered, leaning in closer. They're labeled level gamma security. They document the suspension failure rates. They're stored in Hastings' private safe in his office. I can't get them. But maybe this will help. He quickly pulled a piece of folded paper from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. It's the maintenance schedule for the next major demonstration. They're running the T-44 on the high-speed course at 1400 hours on Friday. That bogey will fail. I guarantee it. Ellie looked at the young lieutenant. He was trembling slightly. She didn't smile, but her eyes conveyed a deep gratitude. Thank you, Lieutenant. You have good instincts. Trust them. She unfolded the paper later, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against the silence of the motor pool. Friday, 1400 hours. The high-speed course. She had a time and a place. The truth was about to make a very loud noise, setting the scene. The high-speed test course at Fort Darrow, midday Friday. A crowd of officers, engineers, and VIPs are watching. Friday arrived under a cloudless sky, the heat baking the testing grounds into a hard, unforgiving surface. A small gallery of observers, including visiting congressional aides, Argos defense executives in crisp civilian suits, and a host of senior officers gathered to watch the demonstration of the new T-44. Colonel Hastings was in his element, radiating confidence and pride. Ellie was officially nowhere near the demonstration. She had been assigned to inventory duty in a remote supply shed, a transparent attempt by Hastings to keep her far from the action. But Ellie was never far from the action when the truth was at stake. She had taken Valkyrie, her trusted M4A3E8 Sherman, on a detour. She parked the tank half a mile from the course, hidden behind a low ridge, the sound of her engine masked by the noise of the approaching T-44. She was documenting the event, ready to record the failure she knew was coming. The demonstration began with the roar of the T-44's powerful engine. The new tank, gleaming in its fresh paint, moved with incredible speed, tearing across the landscape. Colonel Hastings spoke into his microphone, his voice booming with satisfaction. Witness, gentlemen, the future of American armor. Speed, maneuverability, and power, all rolled into one state-of-the-art package. The T-44 hit the far turn of the high-speed loop, a section of the track known for its rough, uneven surface, at near maximum velocity. Ellie watched through her binoculars, her breath held tight in her chest. Then, it happened. Not a simple stall, but a violent, catastrophic failure. The fragile hydraulic linkage in the T-44's complex bogey system, stressed beyond its limits, simply tore itself apart. The tank's front left side immediately dropped, the massive track detensioning and flying off the wheels. The sudden, wrenching motion caused a fuel line to snap. There was a loud crack, followed by a horrible, grinding metal screech, and then a quick, angry burst of fire near the engine deck. The T-44 screeched to a halt, listing awkwardly, smoking, crippled in front of the horrified onlookers. The demonstration was a disaster. Chaos erupted. Colonel Hastings' face went from smug confidence to a sickly white mask of panic. The congressional aides were murmuring furiously. The Argos executives were shouting into their radios. The crew was safe, having followed emergency shutdown procedures. But the T-44 was a smoking wreck, a multi-million-dollar embarrassment. Hastings, desperate to deflect the blame, needed a scapegoat. He needed one immediately, and he knew exactly who it would be. Ellie was already back at the motor pool, meticulously filing her observation photos and checking her logbooks when the patrol vehicle pulled up with screeching tires. Hastings, his uniform slightly askew, stormed into the motor pool. "Major Thompson and 2 military police officers flanking him. Sergeant Major Vance!" Hastings bellowed, his voice raw with fury. "Where in the devil have you been?" Ellie stood ramrod straight, calmly placing her logbook on her workbench. "Sir, I was conducting required maintenance on an M4A3E8 in Sector Delta, as per my schedule. I have the sign-off logs here." Hastings laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't lie to me. Your relic was spotted near the high-speed course just minutes before the T-44's failure. We have witnesses who say the M4 was running its engine nearby. Vibrations. Sergeant Major, your unsanctioned, sentimental testing must have weakened the surrounding ground. You contaminated the test environment. You deliberately sabotaged this critical project." Ellie's voice remained level, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Sir, with all due respect, a 30-ton tank's vibration is not responsible for the failure of a structurally flawed suspension bogie. I documented the T-44's component failures weeks ago in my Level 2 report. The failure was inherent to the design. Silence! Hastings yelled, pointing a shaking finger at her. You are relieved of duty immediately. Your continued defiance and reckless behavior have jeopardized a national defense asset. You are guilty of gross insubordination and endangering a field test. I am personally ensuring you face the maximum disciplinary action. Before she could protest, the military police moved in. She was escorted away, her protests about the T-44's inherent flaw falling on deaf ears. She was stripped of her tools and her rank was functionally put on hold. Ellie Vance, the only person who had tried to warn them, was blamed for the disaster. She was ordered to report to the small, dusty records office in the town of Red Oak, miles away from any military equipment. A punishment designed to break her spirit and bury her truth forever. The injustice was complete. But as she was driven away, Ellie looked back at the motor pool, and she saw Lieutenant Miller watching her go, his young face pale with guilt and shock. She knew then that she had at least. Ellie's new assignment was a form of exile, a slow, bureaucratic death. The records office was located in the oldest municipal building in Red Oak, a sleepy town built on cotton and tradition, with little connection to the high-stakes military research at Fort Darrow. Her days were spent filing ancient personnel records, dusting boxes of microfilm, and listening to the rhythmic tick of an old wall clock. The humiliation was a heavy cloak. People in the town stared, whispering about the disgraced army woman who supposedly caused a multi-million-dollar fire at the base. She felt a deep, cold ache of despair, not for her career, but for the truth she couldn't tell. Yet, Ellie Vance was not built to break. She used her exile. She had access to paper, typewriters, and time. She spent her lunch hours meticulously cross-referencing her logbooks and observation notes, now considered her personal civilian property since she was not technically performing Army duties. She organized everything, the repair time comparisons, the material stress analyses, the nighttime surveillance photos of the T-44's covert maintenance. She built her defense, page by careful page. 2 weeks into her exile, a break arrived from the most unexpected direction. She received a plain, thick manila envelope through the regular mail, addressed simply to E. Vance. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper with a handwritten message. The field manual is too light. Look for the German annex in the 1947 shipment manifest. Code: Aachen is greater than Darrow. M. Ellie felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. M had to be Lieutenant Miller. The message was cryptic, but her time spent in classified motor pool files gave her the context. The 1947 shipment manifest referred to a batch of captured German and Japanese equipment brought back for analysis. Aachen and Darrow were names used for internal testing sites. The message suggested that a test done at Aachen, presumably by the Germans, proved greater than the accepted wisdom at Darrow. Ellie realized what Miller was hinting at. The legendary, whispered about German field test. During the final stages of the war, a highly advanced German engineering unit had captured an M4A3E8 in perfect running order. Instead of destroying it, they rigorously tested it, intending to exploit any weaknesses. The rumor was that their final report, translated and classified after the war, was highly and grudgingly complimentary of the Sherman's simple design philosophy. Hastings had long claimed the report was a myth or a fabrication. The next day, Ellie, using her official records office clearance, started digging. She went straight to the archive of the 1947 Foreign Equipment Manifests, a section Hastings would never look at. She found it, a bulky, leather-bound folder labeled simply Captured Technical Analysis, Operation Jericho. Inside, translated from German, was the report. It was stunning. The German engineers, tasked with finding the Sherman's fatal flaws, had instead written a complex, detailed analysis admitting the tank's operational superiority in the field. They praised the simplified engine access, the ease of track replacement under fire, and the high mobility, concluding, "We must admit that the American philosophy of easily repairable, rapidly produced, and highly mobile tanks presents a greater threat to supply lines and sustained combat capacity than our own over-engineered, slow-to-repair heavy models. The M4 in its final form is an excellent combat asset. Its simplicity is its strength." Ellie felt a powerful surge of vindication, not just professional, but personal. This wasn't some sentimental analysis. This was the grudging respect of her former enemies, the very engineers Hastings sensationalized in his speeches about the outdated American tank. Hastings hadn't just dismissed the Sherman. He had suppressed this document because it completely undermined his push for the complex, costly, and flawed T-44. She photographed every page with a tiny camera she'd kept hidden. The path to justice was now clear. She had to expose the suppression of this foreign analysis and link it to the T-44's known covered-up failures. Her exile had just given her the time and the access to uncover the entire truth. The fight was back on. Ellie spent the next week in a feverish state, working in secret with Lieutenant Miller, who risked everything by making a few cautious late-night visits to the records office. Miller, having seen the German report, was now fully committed. He used his access to provide one final, critical piece of evidence: the financial reports confirming that Colonel Hastings' retirement fund was heavily invested in Argos defense stock options, a clear conflict of interest. The final review board was scheduled for a Tuesday. It was the last chance for Colonel Hastings to salvage the T-44 project before the congressional budget hearings. The board consisted of a visiting general, an auditing officer, and the chief of procurement. Hastings had tried to block Ellie from attending, claiming she was a disgraced former employee. But Ellie, leveraging a dusty Army regulation she found in her archives about a soldier's right to present evidence of misconduct, forced her way onto the agenda for 5 minutes at the end of the meeting. The room was silent and tense as Hastings presented his final, glowing and completely dishonest report on the T-44. Dismissing the recent failure as a fluke component error. "And so, gentlemen," Hastings concluded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, "the T-44 is the undisputed future. The old Sherman is simply not relevant to the modern battlefield." "Colonel, I disagree." Every head snapped to the back of the room. Ellie stood by the door, impeccably dressed in a clean, starched uniform, holding 2 heavy files. Hastings went rigid. "Sergeant Major Vance, you are not authorized." "My authority comes from the truth, Colonel," Ellie interrupted, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute certainty. "I request 5 minutes to present evidence of systematic deception and fraud in accordance with AR 340-19. Section B, Paragraph 4. The General," a stern man named Blackwood, looked at Hastings' panicked face, then at Ellie's determined one. "Proceed, Sergeant Major, 5 minutes." Ellie walked to the head of the table, placing her files down. The first was her own report, now titled T-44 Structural Flaw and Cover-Up, Vance Field Logs. "Gentlemen, I was disciplined for allegedly causing the T-44 failure. The truth is, I predicted it." Ellie pointed to the first page of her report, which detailed the design flaw in the Argos bogie and the failure rates Miller had confirmed. The T-44 failed because it is a fundamentally flawed machine, chosen not for performance, but for profit. This file contains the photographic and logged proof of Argos's nighttime, unsanctioned repairs to hide this fact. A ripple of shock went through the board. Hastings started sputtering. "Slander! This is the work of a disgruntled technician." "Then let's discuss the testimony of your enemies, Colonel," Ellie said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming colder. More dangerous, she slid the second, heavy, leather-bound folder across the table. It landed with a decisive thud. "This file, gentlemen, is a copy of a suppressed document, Operation Jericho. It is the technical analysis of the M4A3E8 Sherman, conducted in 1945 by the German High Command's top armor engineers." She pointed to the conclusion section. "They found its simple design to be a superior long-term combat asset. They admitted the Sherman's field superiority. Ellie looked directly at Colonel Hastings, whose face was now ashen. "The title of this report, Colonel, proves that the enemy you claim to despise confirmed the very truth you tried to bury." She then slammed the financial audit documents, secretly provided by Miller, onto the table on top of the German report. "This, Colonel, explains why you suppressed the German testimony and why you risked the lives of American crews on a faulty tank. Your personal profit margins from Argos defense made you willing to sacrifice national security for your own pocket." The room descended into utter silence, broken only by the general picking up the German report, his eyes scanning the translated text. Hastings, defeated, slumped back into his chair, the web of lies and arrogance finally torn apart. Part 6. Admission and the road ahead, setting the scene. The same conference room. Minutes later, then back to the motor pool. The dust of Fort Darrow feels different now. General Blackwood finished reading the final page of the German report. He set it down, his gaze unwavering as he stared at Colonel Hastings. "Colonel Hastings," the general said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of final judgment. "The financial audit is clear, the T-44's failure is confirmed, and the suppression of a critical foreign intelligence report is an act of treason. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. The military police are waiting." Hastings offered no defense. He simply nodded, his elaborate, traditional career dissolving into disgrace. As the MPs led him away, his eyes, momentarily, met Ellie's. In that look, there was no anger left, just the blank, terrifying reality of a man who had lost everything because he valued pride over principle. General Blackwood turned to Ellie. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her, at the sergeant major who had been mocked as a grease monkey and dismissed for sentimentality. "Sergeant Major Vance," he said finally, "you risked your career, your reputation, and likely your personal safety to expose corruption at the highest level of this command. You used simple, honest data to counter Lee.